The 1980s. We remember it for its absurd hairstyles and synth music, but beneath that colorful surface, something dark was brewing. It was an era that unleashed a revolution in horror cinema, a wild explosion of creativity whose echoes still haunt us with nightmares. In these 10 years, the genre dared to do everything, exploring new abysses, mixing psychological terror with the most visceral violence, and giving birth to monsters that are now part of our culture. But I'm not here to talk about the same old jump scares, or the masked killers even your grandma knows. No, today we're going to unearth 7 specific films. 7 works that didn't just terrify us, but broke the rules of the game, and changed it forever. And we won't just remember them. We'll dig into the cursed behind-the-scenes stories, the urban legends surrounding them, and the almost paranormal impact they left behind. These are the 7 horror films of the 80s that truly changed cinema. We begin this descent at number 7, with a film that dared to stare straight into the most twisted corners of human desire. In 1987 came Hellraiser. And believe me, it wasn't your typical attic ghost story. It threw in our faces the Cenobites, beings from another dimension for whom pleasure and pain are exactly the same thing. The plot introduces Julia Cotton, a woman who discovers that her former lover, the depraved Frank, has escaped from a sadomasochistic hell and now needs human blood to regain a body. But the true horror of Hellraiser isn't the blood, it's its philosophy. It changed cinema because it proposed an adult, metaphysical horror. Its monsters, led by the iconic Pinhead, weren't mindless beasts. They defined themselves as theologians of the Order of the Gash, explorers of carnal experience with a chilling intelligence. This nightmare was born from the mind of writer Clive Barker, who, tired of directors ruining his work, decided to direct it himself, adapting his own novella, The Hellbound Heart. Barker wanted to weave a story where sexuality was the bridge between good and evil, a horror that explored the perversions of the soul. Its impact was a slap in the face to the industry. In a decade saturated with knife-wielding killers, Hellraiser offered something perverse and strangely seductive. It elevated body horror to a new plane, not as simple mutilation, but as a twisted form of transcendence. The Cenobites became icons, proving horror could be philosophical and disturb you on a much deeper level than a simple scare. It changed the monster forever. No longer just a killer, but an angel to some and a demon to others. And if we're talking about pushing the body to its limits, number 6 did it with a syringe full of pitch-black humor and utter madness. We travel back to 1985 to talk about Reanimator, the movie that took gothic horror and injected it with an amphetamine overdose. Directed by Stuart Gordon, we meet Herbert West, a medical student as brilliant as he is unhinged, who creates a serum to reanimate dead tissue. Obviously, everything goes horribly wrong. Together with his roommate, West unleashes a hell of walking corpses in the university morgue, with results that are as disgusting as they are hilarious. The genius of Reanimator was its audacity to jump from horror to comedy in the blink of an eye. One moment you're horrified as a decapitated corpse tries to strangle someone. The next you're laughing hysterically at the absurdity. It changed cinema by perfecting splatstick, the mix of extreme gore with comedy, creating a subgenre later perfected in gems like Evil Dead 2. Its unofficial motto was, more blood, more guts, more of everything. Behind the chaos was a very loose adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's tales. But while Lovecraft was known for solemn cosmic horror, Gordon, who came from experimental theater, decided the only way to bring it to the screen was to embrace excess and grotesque satire. The effects, though low budget, were brutally creative and elevated gore into an art form. Its impact was that of a true cult classic. It didn't blow up the box office, but in the home video market it became an absolute legend. It proved that horror didn't need to take itself seriously to be effective. By fusing laughter with screams, Reanimator broke a taboo and opened the door to a new way of feeling fear. One where you don't know whether to vomit or laugh. But not everything in the 80s was blood and guts. Sometimes the worst horror is the one that invades the safety of your own home. At number 5, we go to 1982 to visit a household that turned into a suburban nightmare, Poltergeist. The story follows the Freeling family, whose perfect life in a quiet neighborhood collapses into hell when their little daughter, Carol Ann, begins talking to spirits through TV static. What seems like child's play becomes a violent and terrifying invasion. Poltergeist changed cinema by taking horror out of castles and forests and putting it in the average family's living room. It made a television, a toy clown, or a tree in the yard feel like deadly threats. Produced by Steven Spielberg, the film had a visual quality and scale the haunted house genre had never dreamed of. But the real horror of Poltergeist isn't on screen, it's in its dark legend. The infamous Poltergeist curse, a belief that a string of deaths was linked to the movie. Dominique Dunne, the actress playing the older sister, was murdered by her ex-boyfriend shortly after release. Years later, Heather O'Rourke, the iconic Carol Ann, died at just 12 years old. Other actors from the sequel, Julian Beck and Will Sampson, also died. The legend grew darker when actress JoBeth Williams confirmed the rumor that in the famous pool scene, the skeletons attacking her were real. They were cheaper than plastic replicas. And as if that weren't enough, there's the eternal controversy. Who actually directed the film? The credit goes to Tobe Hooper, director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but countless cast and crew claimed it was Spielberg himself on set. Spielberg had a clause preventing him from directing another film while making E.T., so the theory is that he used Hooper as a front. The impact of Poltergeist was massive. It became the model for all haunted house films that followed, reminding us that sometimes the scariest place of all is your own home. These first films already show us the incredible and twisted innovation of the decade. If this journey through the dark side of the 80s is disturbing you in just the right way, don't forget to leave a like so the algorithm knows we're on the right track. And if you haven't yet dared, subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss our upcoming nightmares. Let's continue the descent. From paranormal terror at home, we move to a place that should be pure summer innocence. But in 1980, it became the slaughterhouse of an entire generation. At number 4, Camp Crystal Lake, Friday the 13th. The premise couldn't be simpler. A group of teenagers tries to reopen a cursed summer camp. Soon after, an unknown killer begins hunting them down one by one, in the most creative and brutal ways possible. Now, Friday the 13th didn't invent the slasher. That honor goes to Halloween. But it perfected it, turned it into a formula, into a money-making machine that defined the decade. It changed cinema because it established the rules that would be copied endlessly. The killer that never dies, the hormonal teens punished with death, the final girl, who survives thanks to her virtue, and a series of graphic killings that were, let's be honest, the real reason people watched. The film was created with cynical, commercial intent. Director Sean S. Cunningham, seeing the success of Halloween, wanted his own slice of the pie. In fact, he published an ad in the press with the title and logo Friday the 13th, before even having a script, just to test interest. They hired the legendary Tom Savini to orchestrate the deaths, and his work was so wild that gore itself became the star of the 80s slasher. And of course, here's the twist many forget. Jason Voorhees isn't the killer in the first film. It's his mother, Pamela Voorhees, avenging her drowned son. Actress Betsy Palmer admitted she only took the role because she needed money to fix her car, thinking the film was such trash that no one would ever see it. The impact of Friday the 13th was seismic. Critics hated it, but it made a fortune and launched one of the most profitable franchises in history. It proved there was a voracious hunger for the most basic, bloody horror. It changed the genre by shifting the focus from suspense to slaughter as pure spectacle. But let's be honest, what's scarier than a killer you can see coming? One that could be disguised as the person sitting right next to you. At number 3, a masterpiece of paranoia and absolute distrust, The Thing, 1982. John Carpenter's film locks us inside a research base in Antarctica. This group of men, completely isolated from the world, encounters an extraterrestrial life form that can perfectly assimilate and imitate any living being. As the creature infects them, paranoia explodes. No one knows who's human and who's the thing. The Thing changed cinema because it created the most oppressive and suffocating atmosphere ever filmed, and at the same time, set a new standard for practical effects. The true revolution isn't just the monster, it's the human reaction. The film is a study of how trust and society disintegrate when the enemy looks exactly like us. The story behind this gem is one of tragedy and redemption. It was a catastrophic box office failure. Why? Because it was released just weeks after Spielberg's E.T. Audiences wanted a lovable alien, not this nihilistic, terrifying vision of outer space. Critics shredded it, calling it instant junk. But those very effects they mocked, created by a 22-year-old genius named Rob Bottin, are why it's now legendary. Bottin worked non-stop for a year, 7 days a week, even sleeping on set, until he ended up hospitalized from exhaustion. His vision was that the thing should never look the same twice, using all kinds of materials to bring his biomechanical nightmares to life. Over time, the film was reevaluated and is now, without question, one of the greatest horror films ever made. Its influence on cinema and video games is immeasurable, proving that the purest terror doesn't come from a jump scare, but from a slow, crushing sense of dread. From the ice of Antarctica, we travel to the one place you can never escape, your own mind. At number 2, a 1984 film that forever erased the line between dreams and reality, A Nightmare on Elm Street. The film introduced us to Nancy Thompson and her friends, suburban teenagers hunted in their dreams by a horrifying figure. A man with a burned face, a hat, a striped sweater, and a glove with blades. His name was Freddy Krueger, and his rule was simple. If he kills you in your dream, you die for real. Nightmare on Elm Street was revolutionary for one single idea. In an era of silent, faceless killers, director Wes Craven gave us a supernatural villain who spoke, who taunted his victims, with a sadistic sense of humor. It changed the slasher because it moved the massacre from the physical world to the surreal realm of dreams, where anything is possible. This allowed for incredibly imaginative, terrifying deaths like nothing seen before. But the legend behind its creation is almost as disturbing as the film. Wes Craven was inspired by a series of articles he read in the LA Times about Cambodian refugees who, after fleeing genocide, began dying mysteriously in their sleep. They complained of terrifying nightmares and simply never woke up. The phenomenon, known as Asian death syndrome, gave Craven the seed of an inescapable horror. Even with such an original idea, studios like Disney and Paramount rejected the script. They thought it was ridiculous. It was a small distributor on the brink of bankruptcy, New Line Cinema, that took the risk. The impact was an earthquake. The film saved New Line Cinema, which came to be known as the house that Freddy built. Freddy Krueger became a pop culture icon, as famous as Dracula. The movie revitalized a genre that was rotting in its own formula and taught us that the scariest threat of all lives inside your head. Before we reach the throne, we must make a mandatory stop at the threshold of raw, disturbing terror. An honorable mention for a 1982 film that dared to show a horror unseen, but felt in the most brutal way imaginable, The Entity. The movie tells the story of Carla Moran, a single mother repeatedly attacked and raped by an invisible, violent entity in her own home. Her struggle isn't only against this paranormal assailant, but also against the disbelief of doctors and psychologists who insist it's all in her mind. The Entity changed horror because it was based on the alleged real case of Doris Bither, a California woman in the 70s who claimed to suffer the same attacks. The film treated supernatural terror not as cheap scares, but with the seriousness of a psychological drama and terrifying realism. It portrayed the most extreme vulnerability, where the enemy is invisible and the home itself becomes a torture chamber. Although not a box office hit, its cult legacy grew, impacting audiences with its oppressive atmosphere and its rare, bold exploration of trauma. And here we are at number 1. The film that stopped being just horror and became simply a cinematic masterpiece. A 1980 movie that doesn't just scare you, it unsettles you on a level you can't explain. At the top of this infernal list, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. The story follows Jack Torrance, a failed writer who takes a job as winter caretaker of the isolated Overlook Hotel, bringing along his wife Wendy and his son Danny. As the snow traps them inside, a malevolent presence in the hotel begins devouring Jack's sanity. At the same time, Danny, who has a psychic ability called The Shining, suffers terrifying visions of the hotel's bloody past and its future. The Shining changed cinema forever because it elevated horror to the category of art. Kubrick applied his mathematical precision, his almost inhuman coldness, to a genre critics usually dismissed. His revolutionary use of the Steadicam, with those endless hallways we follow Danny through, created a psychological dread and disorientation never seen before. It proved horror could be ambiguous, atmospheric, and open to countless interpretations. The legends of its production are as famous as the film itself. The shoot lasted over a year and was hell, especially for actress Shelley Duvall, whom Kubrick psychologically tormented to extract the performance he wanted. Author Stephen King hated the film. For King, Jack was a good man destroyed by the hotel. For Kubrick, Jack was always a monster. The hotel just gave him the final push. Its cultural impact is immense. At first, reviews were mixed, but over time it was recognized as a masterpiece. It spawned an entire universe of theories, that it's an allegory for the genocide of Native Americans, or a confession by Kubrick about allegedly faking the moon landing. It became the benchmark for prestige horror, proving that a scary movie can be as complex and worthy of analysis as any art house drama. These 7 films are proof that 80s horror was far more than screams and blood. It was a decade of boldness, of risk, of narratives that twisted our very definition of fear. From the philosophical sadomasochism of Hellraiser to the artistic madness of The Shining, each of these films left an indelible scar, changing not just a genre, but cinema itself. And their echoes still haunt us today. But of course, this is only my list, my personal descent. And the beauty of horror is that it's deeply intimate. Now it's your turn. Which 80s horror movie do you think was missing from this list? And why did it change cinema for you? Let me know in the comments. I'll be reading and debating them all. If you enjoyed this journey into the darkest corners of cinema, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, because in the next video we'll explore the most disturbing horror films based on true events. Thanks for joining me on this ride, and may you have sweet nightmares.